Have you ever been so gripped by an unexplained craving that it haunted your every thought, pulling you towards something unknown and dangerous, even as a voice deep inside screamed at you to turn back? What if that craving led you to a place where every bite could cost you more than just your sanity, where the hunger itself was a gateway to something far darker than you ever imagined? It's a question that used to flit through my mind on those rare nights when sleep eluded me. That was before I found myself wandering the empty streets at midnight, driven by a hunger I couldn't understand, a hunger that led me to a place that shouldn't exist. It was during one of those long, restless nights that I first saw the truck. I was coming off another exhausting night shift at the hospital, the kind that leaves you too wired to sleep, but too drained to do anything else. My mind was foggy, my legs carrying me without direction, when I noticed a soft, golden glow up ahead. I stopped. The streets were usually dead at this hour, but there was a food truck parked at the corner of an alley that I was sure had been empty just the night before. The truck was small, unassuming, its metal sides reflecting the dim streetlights. The only sign of life was the warm, inviting light spilling out from the open window, casting long shadows on the pavement. Curiosity tugged at me, a gentle pull that I couldn't resist. As I approached, the scent of something delicious hit me, rich, savory, unlike anything I'd ever smelled. My stomach growled, a reminder that I hadn't eaten since my lunch break hours ago. But there was something more than just hunger drawing me in, something deeper, more primal. "Good evening," came a voice from the window. I jumped, startled by the sudden sound in the quiet night. The man behind the counter was smiling at me, his face half hidden in shadow. There was something unsettling about him, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed too dark, too deep, or the way his smile never quite reached them. "Hungry?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost melodic. "You're just in time. We're only open for a short while." I nodded, words failing me. My mouth watered as I stared at the menu board beside him. There were no prices listed, just a simple list of dishes, none of which I recognized. I should have walked away then, should have ignored the strange feeling gnawing at the back of my mind, but I didn't. Instead, I ordered the first thing my eyes landed on. "Excellent choice," the man said, his smile widening as he handed me a steaming box. The aroma hit me again, stronger this time, and I couldn't wait to taste whatever was inside. I barely noticed the man watching me intently as I took my first bite. The flavor exploded in my mouth, rich, savory, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was like nothing I'd ever tasted before, each bite better than the last. I finished it all too quickly, the hunger in my belly replaced by a strange, creeping unease. "How was it?" the man asked, his voice cutting through the haze in my mind. "Delicious," I replied automatically, though the word felt hollow as soon as it left my lips. I felt full, but not satisfied, as if the meal had filled my stomach, but left something else, something deeper, empty. The man's smile grew wider, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, something dark and hungry. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the same calm, friendly expression. "Come back any time," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We're always open at midnight." I mumbled a thank you and turned to leave, my legs shaky, my mind reeling. As I walked away, I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see the food truck still parked at the corner. But it was gone. The alley was empty, as if it had never been there at all. That night, I dreamed of the food truck. I was standing in front of it, the man's shadowy figure behind the counter, his smile too wide, his eyes too dark. The food was in my hands, steaming delicious. But when I looked down, it wasn't food at all. It was something dark and writhing, something that shouldn't be eaten. I woke up in a cold sweat, the taste of the meal still on my tongue. I told myself it was just a dream, just my mind playing tricks on me after a long, stressful night. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it, something I couldn't explain. The next night, I found myself wandering the streets again, my feet leading me back to that same corner. And there it was, just as before, the food truck waiting for me, its golden light spilling out into the darkness. I should have turned back, should have ignored the pull that was dragging me toward it, but I didn't. I was too hungry. The next day at work, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The hospital's sterile. White walls felt more oppressive than usual, and every sound seemed magnified. Footsteps echoing through empty corridors, the constant beep of machines in the background. My mind kept drifting back to the food truck, to the man with the two dark eyes and the food that tasted too good to be real. I told myself it was nothing, just a strange coincidence. Maybe the food truck was new in town, a late-night option for people like me who worked odd hours. But that explanation didn't sit right. There was something about the way it had appeared, as if out of nowhere, and then vanished just as quickly. And then there was the food itself. Delicious, yes, but there had been something else in it, something that left a bitter aftertaste in my mind. By the time my shift ended, the unease had grown into a gnawing anxiety. I tried to go straight home, but my feet had other plans. I found myself walking the same route as the night before, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me hoped the food truck wouldn't be there, that it had been a one-time thing, a figment of my overworked imagination. But it was there, waiting for me at the corner of the alley, just like before. The same golden glow, the same delicious aroma wafting through the air, tugging at my hunger. This time, the pull was even stronger, more insistent, as if the food truck was calling out to me, promising to fill the void that had been growing inside me all day. I approached the truck with a strange sense of inevitability, like a moth drawn to a flame. The man behind the counter greeted me with the same unsettling smile, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Back again, I see," he said, his voice smooth and welcoming, but with an edge that set my nerves on edge. "Yeah," I muttered, unable to meet his gaze. "I was in the neighborhood." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Of course you were. What can I get for you tonight?" I glanced at the menu board, but the words swam before my eyes, indistinct and confusing. It didn't matter, though. Something deep inside me already knew what I wanted. "I'll have whatever you recommend," I said, the words slipping out before I could think. "An excellent choice," the man replied, his smile widening. He turned to prepare the food, his movements smooth and practiced. I watched entranced as he worked, his hands moving with an almost hypnotic grace. Within moments, he handed me a steaming box, just like the night before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the box and took a bite, the flavors bursting in my mouth, even more intense than the night before. It was rich and savory, with a depth of taste that was almost overwhelming. But as I ate, I noticed something else, an odd sensation, like a creeping numbness spreading through my body, starting from my mouth and working its way down to my core. The food was delicious, but it left me feeling wrong, as if with each bite, I was consuming something more than just a meal, something dark, something that was slowly, insidiously, changing me. I finished the meal, though, unable to stop myself, even as my mind screamed at me to throw it away. The man watched me the whole time, his eyes glinting with something like satisfaction. When I was done, I handed the empty box back to him, my hands trembling. What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Just a little something special," he replied, his tone casual. But there was an undercurrent of something else, something sinister. "We like to give our customers a memorable experience." I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. There was something in his gaze that warned me not to push further. Not yet. So I nodded, mumbled another thank you, and hurried away, my heart racing. As I walked home, the numbness began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. My mind felt sharper, more focused, but there was also a creeping fear that I couldn't shake. What had I just eaten? And why did I feel like I needed more? That night, the dreams returned, even more vivid and disturbing than before. I was standing in the alley, the food truck before me, but this time, the man wasn't alone. Shadows loomed around him, figures moving in the darkness, watching me with hungry eyes. The food in my hands was pulsing, alive, and when I looked down, I saw that it wasn't food at all. It was raw flesh, still bleeding. I woke up gasping, my body drenched in sweat. The taste of the meal lingered in my mouth, but it was different now, metallic, like blood. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, trying to shake off the remnants of the nightmare. But when I looked up at the mirror, I froze. For a split second, my reflection didn't look like me. The face staring back at me was gaunt, with hollow eyes and sharp teeth, a twisted version of myself that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I blinked, and the normal reflection returned, but the image was burned into my mind. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. I felt too sick, too shaken by the events of the night before. Instead, I stayed home, pacing my apartment, trying to figure out what was happening to me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the growing hunger gnawing at my insides. As night fell, the hunger became unbearable. I knew what it was craving, and I hated myself for it, but the need was too strong to resist. I left my apartment, my legs moving on their own, carrying me back to the place I dreaded most. The food truck was waiting for me, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The man was there, too, his smile as welcoming and unnerving as ever. "I knew you'd be back," he said, his voice smooth as silk. I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted, my voice trembling. "What's happening to me?" The man's smile widened, his eyes glinting with something like triumph. "It's simple," he said, leaning closer. "You're hungry, and you'll keep coming back until that hunger is satisfied. But what's in the food? What are you doing to me?" He shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "I'm just giving you what you need. I wanted to run, to get away from that place and never look back. But my body wouldn't listen. Instead, I found myself ordering again, the words slipping from my lips before I could stop them. The man handed me another steaming box, and this time, I could feel his eyes on me, watching intently as I took the first bite. The food was as delicious as ever, the flavors rich and complex. But there was something else, too. Something darker, more sinister, hidden beneath the surface. As I ate, the world around me seemed to shift, the shadows growing longer, the night darker. The food truck's light flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the darkness behind the man, something that shouldn't be there. I finished the meal, feeling both satisfied and hollow at the same time. The man took the empty box from me, his smile never wavering. "You'll be back," he said, his voice low and certain. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there were no answers, only more questions. I turned and walked away, the man's eyes boring into my back, the darkness pressing in around me. As I reached the corner, I glanced back, half expecting the food truck to have vanished again. But this time, it was still there, the man standing in the window, watching me with that same unsettling smile. The hunger was still there, too, gnawing at my insides, growing stronger with each passing moment. I knew I should stay away, should never go back, but deep down I knew the truth. I would return. I had to. The hunger wouldn't let me stay away. The next few days passed in a blur. My life became a series of strange, disconnected moments. Fragments of conversations I couldn't fully recall, tasks at work I barely completed, and hours spent staring at nothing as the hunger gnawed away at me. It was as if my mind was slowly unraveling, each thread pulling me closer to the one place I knew I shouldn't go. I started avoiding mirrors, Every time I caught my reflection, there was something wrong with it. Something off about the way my eyes stared back at me, darker and more hollow with each passing day. My skin was losing its color, becoming pale and waxy, and my once healthy frame was growing gaunt, my clothes hanging off me like they belonged to someone else. The worst part was the whispers. They started quietly, at the edge of my hearing, little murmurs that I could almost convince myself were just the wind or my imagination. But they grew louder with each passing night, until they filled my ears whenever I was alone, filling my head with dark, incomprehensible thoughts. They spoke of hunger, of darkness, of a craving that could never be satisfied. They whispered my name in the dead of night, urging me to return to the food truck, to take another bite, to feed the insatiable void inside me. I tried to resist. I really did, but it was impossible. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger the hunger became, until it was all I could think about. It consumed me body and soul, leaving me a shell of the person I had once been. It wasn't long before I found myself standing in front of the food truck once again, the golden glow spilling out into the dark alley, illuminating the man's ever-present smile. This time, there was no hesitation, no lingering doubt. I stepped up to the counter, and he was already waiting for me. "You're looking a little worse for wear," the man commented, his voice laced with false concern. "Not sleeping well. Why is this happening to me?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing to me?" He tilted his head, as if considering the question, then shrugged. "You're just hungry," he said, as if that explained everything. "I'm giving you what you need, what you've always needed." "What do you mean?" I asked, but the words came out weak and tremulous. My mind felt like it was slipping, the edges of reality fraying as the hunger took over. "You'll understand soon enough," he replied, handing me another steaming box. "But first you need to eat." I wanted to throw the box to the ground, to refuse whatever he was offering me, but my hands betrayed me. I opened the box, the smell of the food overwhelming my senses, and before I knew it, I was eating. Each bite was a strange mix of pleasure and disgust, the flavors rich and intoxicating, yet carrying a bitter undertone that made my stomach churn. As I ate, the whispers grew louder, almost drowning out the man's voice. They spoke of ancient things, of dark, forgotten places, and of a hunger that could never be sated. They spoke of the food, of the way it clung to my insides, corrupting me from within, changing me into something else. The man watched me with that same unnerving smile, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're almost there," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Just a little more and you'll understand." I finished the meal, my hands shaking, the box slipping from my fingers as the last bite slid down my throat. The world seemed to tilt, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I stumbled back, my vision blurring as the man's smile grew wider, his face distorting in the dim light. "You should meet the others," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. "They've been waiting for you." Before I could respond, the shadows in the alley shifted, and I realized we weren't alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms twisted and grotesque, barely human. They moved with an unnatural grace, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, their mouths twisted into expressions of hunger and despair. I backed away, fear clawing at my chest, but the man only laughed. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice almost gentle. "They're just like you. They were hungry too once." The figures closed in around me, their presence oppressive, suffocating. I could feel their hunger, their desperation, echoing my own. They whispered my name, their voices blending with the ones already in my head, urging me to join them, to embrace the darkness that had taken root inside me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. It can't be real." "Oh, it's real," the man replied, his voice cold now, all traces of friendliness gone. "And it's just the beginning." The figures reached for me, their hands cold and clammy, their touch sending waves of nausea through my body. I tried to pull away, but they held me fast, their grip tightening with every passing second. "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, calculating interest. "You were chosen," he said simply. "You've always been one of us. You just didn't know it yet." With that, he stepped back, and the figures surged forward, their whispers growing louder, filling my ears, my mind, my soul. I could feel myself slipping, the world around me fading as the darkness closed in, as the hunger took over completely. And then, just when I thought I would lose myself entirely, a new thought broke through the haze, clear, sharp, and terrifying. I wasn't being devoured by the darkness. I was becoming it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, snapping me out of the trance that had held me. With a burst of desperate strength, I shoved the figures away, their cold hands tearing at my clothes, my skin. But I didn't care. I stumbled backward, away from the food truck, away from the man, away from the darkness that threatened to consume me. The man didn't try to stop me. He just watched, his expression unreadable, as I backed out of the alley, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "You can't run from this!" he called after me, his voice calm, almost bored. "You'll be back. They all come back." I didn't respond. I turned and fled, my legs trembling, my mind reeling. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, in my mind, even as I ran through the empty streets, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cursed food truck as possible. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the hunger. It was inside me now, a part of me, and I knew it would never leave. That night, the dreams returned, even more vivid and terrifying than before. I saw the figures from the alley, their twisted forms reaching for me, pulling me into the darkness. I saw the man, his face shifting and changing, becoming something monstrous, something that had no place in the world of the living. And I saw myself, standing among them, my eyes hollow, my skin pale and lifeless, my mouth twisted into a hungry grin. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my body trembling. The hunger gnawed at me, stronger than ever, but I refused to give in. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. But even as I told myself that, I knew the truth. The food truck was waiting for me, and it would be there again tonight. It would always be there, just around the corner, just out of sight, waiting for me to give in to the hunger that was slowly consuming me. And one day, I knew I wouldn't be able to resist. One day, I would go back. I tried everything to avoid the food truck. I took different routes home, staying in well-lit areas, hoping the crowds would keep the darkness at bay. I even started carrying a cross, a rosary, anything I thought might protect me from whatever was lurking in the shadows. But nothing worked. The whispers grew louder, their words more insistent, and the hunger gnawed at me day and night, relentless and unforgiving. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the food truck waiting for me, the man's face twisted into that unnerving smile, the shadowy figures reaching out to drag me into the darkness. My dreams were filled with horrors I couldn't escape, horrors that felt too real to be mere figments of my imagination. The hunger was always there, a constant, gnawing presence in the pit of my stomach, but it was more than just physical. It was a hunger of the soul, a craving for something I couldn't name, but knew I needed. Every meal I ate during the day tasted like ash in my mouth, unsatisfying, empty. Only the food from the truck could fill the void, but I knew what it was doing to me, how it was changing me. I started losing time. Hours would pass in a blink, entire evenings disappearing without a trace. I would find myself standing in strange places, unsure how I had gotten there. My reflection in the mirror looked more and more like a stranger, my skin pale and sickly, my eyes sunken and dark. I hardly recognized myself anymore. The final straw came one night, When I woke up on the floor of my apartment, the taste of the food still lingering on my tongue. I had no memory of going to the food truck, no memory of eating, but the evidence was there, a crumpled box beside me, the remnants of the meal still warm. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the hunger, the growing realization that I was losing myself bit by bit to something I couldn't understand. It was too much. I had to find out the truth, had to understand what was happening to me and why. And there was only one place to get answers. That night, I didn't try to resist. I followed the hunger, letting it guide me through the dark streets until I found myself once again standing in front of the food truck. The golden light bathed the alley in an eerie glow, and the man behind the counter looked up at me with that same unsettling smile. "Back again," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "I knew you would be." "I want answers," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempts to keep it steady. "What are you doing to me? What's in the food?" The man's smile widened, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're not ready for the truth," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But you're getting close. Another meal or two, and you'll understand everything." "No," I snapped, anger bubbling up inside me. "I want to know now. What is this place? What's happening to me?" The man tilted his head, regarding me with an amused expression. "Very well," he said slowly, "but the truth comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" "What do you mean?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a deep, instinctual fear settle in my gut. "There's always a price for knowledge," the man said, his voice taking on a darker, more sinister tone, "especially when it comes to things best left unknown. But since you insist," he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age, and it had the faint smell of something long forgotten. He slid it across the counter toward me. "Read this," he said. "It'll tell you everything you need to know." I hesitated for a moment before picking up the notebook, my fingers trembling as I opened the cover. The first few pages were filled with scrawled notes, almost illegible, the handwriting frantic and uneven. But as I began to read, the words started to make sense, and a story began to unfold. A story of darkness, hunger, and a curse that had spanned centuries. The notebook belonged to a man named Jonathan, who had lived nearly a century ago. Like me, he had discovered the food truck one night, drawn to it by an inexplicable hunger. The food had been delicious, irresistible, but it came with a cost. As Jonathan continued to visit the truck, he began to notice changes in himself. His appearance, his thoughts, his very soul seemed to be shifting, morphing into something dark and unnatural. The more he ate, the more he lost himself, until he became a hollow shell, a vessel for something far older and more malevolent than he could comprehend. The food, he discovered, wasn't just food. It was a conduit, a way for something to latch onto the eater's soul, slowly consuming them until there was nothing left. And the food truck, it wasn't just a truck. It was something far older, far darker, a thing that had existed for centuries, preying on the weak, the lost, the hungry. It moved through time and space, appearing where it was needed, always with a new owner, a new victim to carry on its cursed legacy. Jonathan had tried to resist, tried to escape, but it was too late. The hunger had taken root in him, just as it had in so many others before him. He had become the food truck's new owner, its new servant, bound to it for all eternity, cursed to feed others as he had been fed. And now I realized with a sinking feeling in my gut, it was happening to me. I looked up from the notebook, my hands shaking. The man was watching me closely, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You're almost there," he said softly. "Soon you'll understand." "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I won't let it happen. I won't become like you." The man chuckled a low, humorless sound. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice dripping with finality. "The hunger is in you now. It's part of you, and the more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. "I can stop it," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. "I can stop this." The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, detached interest. "There is one way," he said slowly, "but it's dangerous. Very dangerous." "Tell me," I demanded, desperation creeping into my voice. The man leaned closer, his eyes boring into mine. "The food truck exists outside of time, outside of the natural order. It's bound to something ancient, something that feeds on the souls of the lost. If you want to break free, you have to destroy the connection. You have to sever the link between the truck and its power." "How?" I asked, my heart pounding. "There's a ritual," the man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "A final meal, one that no one has ever survived. If you can eat it, all of it, and live, the connection will be broken. The truck will be destroyed, and you'll be free. And if I don't survive?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Then you'll become part of the truck," the man said simply. "Your soul will be bound to it, just like all the others." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. It was a terrifying prospect, but what choice did I have? I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep letting the hunger consume me piece by piece. If this was my only chance at freedom, I had to take it. "When do I do the ritual?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Tomorrow night," the man said, his smile returning. "Come back at midnight, and I'll prepare the final meal. But be warned, it will be unlike anything you've ever tasted." I nodded, my mind racing with fear and anticipation. I turned to leave, but the man's voice stopped me in my tracks. "Remember," he called after me, "there's always a price for knowledge. Make sure you're ready to pay it." I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked away from the food truck, my heart pounding, the notebook clutched tightly in my hand. The whispers followed me, growing louder with every step, but I forced myself to keep moving, to focus on what I had to do. That night, the hunger was worse than ever, clawing at me from the inside, demanding to be fed. But I resisted. I had to. The next night, I would face the final test, the final meal, and I would either break free or be consumed. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of the food truck, of the man's twisted smile, and of the final meal that awaited me. It was a dark, pulsating thing, alive and writhing on the plate, and as I lifted it to my mouth, the whispers grew louder, filling my mind with dark, terrible thoughts. But I didn't wake up in fear this time. I woke up with a grim determination. Tomorrow night it would all end, one way or another. The day passed in a haze of dread and anticipation. Every tick of the clock felt like the countdown to my doom, the final moments before I would face whatever dark force lay behind the food truck's facade. The whispers had quieted, as if they were waiting, watching, biding their time until midnight. The hunger, however, was relentless, gnawing at me with a fury I had never felt before. It was as if my body knew what was coming and was trying to consume as much as it could before it was too late. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I tried reading through Jonathan's notebook again, searching for any detail I might have missed, any hint that could give me an edge in the ritual. But the words seemed to blur together, the frantic scrawls of a man who had long since lost his sanity. The only clear message was that the food truck was not of this world, and to challenge it meant to challenge something far older, far darker than I could comprehend. As evening fell, I felt the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. I was terrified, but there was no turning back now. If I didn't go through with the ritual, the hunger would consume me entirely, and I would become just another lost soul bound to the truck. When the clock struck 11, I gathered what little courage I had left and set out. The streets were quiet, the night air thick with an unnatural stillness. I walked with purpose, each step bringing me closer to the inevitable. The city around me felt alien, as though it had been drained of life. leaving behind only shadows and echoes. The food truck was waiting for me, just as I knew it would be. Its golden light cut through the darkness, illuminating the alley like a beacon. The man was there too, leaning casually against the counter, his smile as unsettling as ever. "You're right on time," he said, his voice smooth and warm, as if we were old friends meeting for a midnight snack. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was truly ready for what was about to happen. My hands were trembling, my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't back down. The hunger was a constant, gnawing presence, and I could feel it growing more intense with every passing second. "Good," the man said, stepping aside to reveal a small table set up in front of the truck. On it was a single dish, covered by a silver cloche. The air around it seemed to pulse, as if the very space was bending to accommodate whatever dark energy the meal contained. "This is it," the man continued, his tone turning serious. "The final meal. If you can finish it, you'll be free. But if you fail..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what was at stake. My soul, my very existence, hung in the balance. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on the dish as the man lifted the cloche, revealing the meal beneath. The smell hit me first, rich, savory, and yet there was something else, something putrid, hidden beneath the layers of aroma. It made my stomach turn, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. The dish itself was a twisted, pulsating mass of what looked like raw meat, though it was unlike any meat I had ever seen. It was dark and glistening, with veins of some unknown substance running through it, throbbing with a sickening rhythm. "Go on," the man urged, his voice soft and coaxing. "Take a bite. It's what you've been craving all along." I hesitated, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, to get away from this place and never look back. But the hunger was too strong. It clawed at me, urging me forward, and before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand trembling as I picked up the fork and knife. The first cut into the meat was like slicing through something alive. The knife met resistance, and I had to saw through the flesh. The sound it made more like tearing than cutting. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to lift the piece to my mouth. As soon as it touched my tongue, the world around me seemed to shift. The flavors exploded in my mouth, rich, intoxicating, but also bitter, rotten, like decay and death wrapped in layers of spice and sweetness. It was both the most delicious and the most repulsive thing I had ever tasted. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, shapes that shouldn't be there. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my mind with dark, incomprehensible thoughts. They urged me to keep eating, to consume every last bite, to give in to the hunger that had been growing inside me for so long. I forced another piece into my mouth, each bite sending waves of revulsion through my body. But the hunger demanded more. I ate with a frantic desperation, each mouthful bringing me closer to the edge, closer to something I couldn't quite grasp. The man watched in silence, his eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction. I knew he was waiting for something, waiting for the moment when I would either triumph or fall. As I neared the end of the dish, my vision began to warp. The world around me twisted, the alley stretching and contorting as if reality itself was unraveling. I could feel something happening inside me, something dark and ancient awakening, feeding on the meal just as I was. My hands shook uncontrollably, my skin pale and clammy, sweat dripping down my face. And then, as I lifted the final piece to my mouth, I hesitated. I could feel the darkness closing in, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. This was it, the moment of truth. "Finish it," the man said, his voice cutting through the haze like a knife. "One more bite, and it's all over." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the final piece. It seemed to pulse in my hand, almost as if it were alive, waiting for me to make the final move. The hunger roared within me, a beast desperate to be fed. But I could feel something else now, something deeper and more terrifying. The realization that this was not just about feeding a physical hunger. This was about feeding something far more sinister, something that had been lurking inside me from the moment I first tasted the food. I looked at the man, searching his eyes for any sign of humanity, any glimmer of the person he might have once been. But there was nothing there, only cold, detached amusement, as if he were watching a particularly interesting experiment unfold. I realized then that he had been through this before, countless times. He had seen others stand where I stood now, and he knew how it would end. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. There was still a part of me, buried deep beneath the layers of hunger and fear, that wanted to fight. I wasn't going to let this thing take me without a struggle. I placed the final piece back on the plate, my hand shaking violently as I did so. The man's smile faltered, just for a moment, before it returned, more menacing than ever. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Aren't you hungry?" "I won't do it," I said, though my voice was weak, trembling. "I won't let this, whatever it is, take me." The man's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can resist?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can walk away now, after everything?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The hunger was still there, still clawing at me, desperate for that final bite. But I forced myself to stand my ground. I wouldn't let it win. Not like this. The man stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "There's no going back," he whispered, his voice now a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You've already eaten. You're already one of us." "No," I said, the word a weak, desperate plea. "I can still." "You're mine," he snarled, his voice suddenly filled with a fury that hadn't been there before. "You belong to the truck now, to the hunger. You can't escape it. You never could." The world around me seemed to tilt, the shadows in the alley growing darker, more oppressive. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my mind with dark, incomprehensible thoughts. I could feel myself slipping, the darkness closing in, the hunger overwhelming me. My body ached for the final bite, for the release that would come with it. But then, just as I was about to give in, a voice, a small, clear voice, cut through the noise. It was my own voice, the part of me that was still clinging to the last shred of hope. "Fight," it whispered. "Don't let it take you." With a surge of strength I didn't know I had, I threw the plate to the ground, the final piece of the meal scattering across the pavement. The man's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening in a silent snarl of rage. The shadows in the alley seemed to recoil, the whispers fading to a low, angry murmur. "You fool," the man hissed, his voice now a deep, guttural growl. "You think this will save you?" I backed away, my heart pounding, as the man's form began to change. His features twisted and distorted, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. His skin darkened, his limbs elongating, as he transformed into something monstrous, something that barely resembled the man I had seen before. "You're mine!" he roared, his voice now a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. "You can't escape me!" But as he advanced, something strange happened. The light from the food truck began to flicker, the once warm glow turning cold and harsh. The truck itself seemed to shudder, its metal sides warping and twisting, as if it were reacting to the man's transformation. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and I realized with a shock that the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel around us. The man, no, the creature, reached for me, his clawed hand outstretched. But before he could touch me, a sudden, blinding light erupted from the food truck. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the light engulfed him, tearing him apart piece by piece. I watched, frozen in place, as the truck and the creature were consumed by the light, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. and then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The alley was empty, the truck and the creature gone without a trace. The air was still, the night silent, as if nothing had ever happened. I stood there for a long moment, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just witnessed. The hunger was gone, the whispers silent, but I knew that I was not the same person I had been before. I had come to the brink of darkness and somehow managed to pull myself back, but at a cost I couldn't yet understand. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the ground where the truck had been. It was the notebook, Jonathan's notebook, lying open to a page I hadn't seen before. With trembling hands, I picked it up, my eyes scanning the words. "The final meal was never meant to be finished," the entry read. "To eat it would be to succumb, to lose oneself completely. The only way to break free is to reject it, to refuse the darkness. Only then can the curse be lifted, but at a terrible price. The truck will move on, but it will leave its mark. Those who survive are never truly free." I closed the notebook, the weight of its words settling over me like a heavy shroud. The hunger was gone, yes, but something else had taken its place. Something darker. Something that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. As I walked away from the alley, the night felt different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper, and I knew that I would never be able to escape what I had experienced. The food truck was gone, but its presence lingered, a dark stain on my soul. I didn't know where it would appear next, who it would choose, but I knew one thing for certain. The hunger never truly dies. It only waits. And somewhere, in another dark corner of the world, someone else would find themselves standing in front of that cursed truck, drawn by a hunger they couldn't understand. After that night, I tried to return to my old life, but nothing was the same. The hospital corridors felt too narrow, the lights too bright, and the people too distant. Everyone seemed to move in slow motion, their voices muffled, as if I were watching them from behind a thick pane of glass. I went through the motions of my job, but my mind was elsewhere, haunted by the memories of the food truck and the darkness that had nearly consumed me. Days turned into weeks, but the feeling of unease never left. The notebook's final entry echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I wasn't truly free. I had survived, but at what cost? What had I become in the process? The hunger was gone, but it had left behind a void, a hollow space, where something vital had been ripped out. I avoided the streets where the food truck had once appeared, but it didn't matter. I saw it everywhere, on the faces of strangers, in the flicker of headlights passing by, in the shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. The truck was gone, but its presence lingered, a dark, insidious whisper in the back of my mind. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the whispers returned. They were different now, softer, more subtle, but still unmistakable. They didn't urge me to eat, but they spoke of other things, dark secrets, hidden truths, things that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore them, but they were relentless, growing louder with each passing night until they filled my every waking moment. I became obsessed with the notebook, reading and rereading Jonathan's frantic scrawls, searching for something, anything, that might explain what was happening to me. But there were no answers, only more questions. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface of something far more terrifying than I could comprehend. The more I read, the more I began to understand what Jonathan had gone through. His notes detailed his descent into madness, his struggle to resist the hunger, and his eventual realization that he could never truly escape. The truck had left its mark on him, just as it had on me, and he had spent the rest of his life trying to understand the darkness that had claimed him. But there was one entry buried deep within the notebook that caught my attention. It was written in a different hand, the writing shakier, more desperate. It was dated years after the rest of the entries, as if Jonathan had returned to the notebook after a long hiatus. The words were almost illegible, but I could make out enough to understand the message. "The hunger never truly leaves," it read. "It changes, adapts. It hides in the corners of your mind, waiting for the moment when you are weakest. And when it returns, it is stronger than before. There is no escaping it. The truck, it is part of me now. I see it in my dreams, in the shadows, in every bite I take. I thought I had won, but I was wrong. It will come back for me, just as it will come back for you. It always does." The words chilled me to the bone. I had thought I was free, but the truth was I had only delayed the inevitable. The hunger would return, and when it did, it would be more powerful than ever. The food truck wasn't just a curse. It was a living, breathing entity, something that existed outside of time and space, feeding on the souls of those it ensnared. The whispers grew louder after I read that entry, almost as if they were confirming what I had just learned. I could feel the hunger stirring deep within me, a faint but unmistakable craving that I had thought I had conquered. It was there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, waiting for the moment when I would be too weak to resist, and that moment came sooner than I expected. It was late, the hospital quiet, the corridors empty as I finished my shift. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind a tangled mess of fear and anxiety. The whispers had been relentless all day, distracting me, making it impossible to focus. All I wanted was to go home, to collapse into bed, and try to find some semblance of peace. But as I stepped outside, I saw it. The food truck. It was parked at the end of the street, its golden light spilling out into the darkness. The sight of it stopped me dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but it was still there, as real as the night air around me. The man was standing behind the counter, just as he had been the first time I saw him. His smile was wide, his eyes gleaming with that familiar, unsettling hunger. He raised a hand in greeting, beckoning me forward. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that place as possible. But the hunger, it was back, stronger than ever, roaring inside me like a beast that had been starved for far too long. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, a craving so intense it was almost painful. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This can't be happening." But it was. The truck was there, the hunger was there, and I knew, deep down, that I had never truly escaped. The truck had let me go, only to pull me back when the time was right, when I was at my weakest. I forced myself to turn away, to walk in the opposite direction, but every step felt like I was moving through molasses. The hunger clawed at me, urging me to turn back, to give in. The whispers filled my ears, drowning out all other thoughts. I didn't make it far. My feet slowed, then stopped, my body trembling with the effort of resisting. I could smell the food now, that intoxicating aroma that had once drawn me in so easily. It was everything I wanted, everything I needed. Before I knew it, I was walking back toward the truck. Each step felt like a betrayal, but I couldn't stop myself. The hunger was too strong, too overwhelming. It had taken root inside me, just as it had in Jonathan, just as it had in countless others before him. The man's smile grew wider as I approached, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "I knew you'd come back," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "They always do." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was a whirl of fear, anger, and desperation, but my body was on autopilot, moving toward the truck as if pulled by an invisible force. The man reached beneath the counter and pulled out a steaming box, just like the ones before. He handed it to me without a word, his smile never faltering. I took it, my hands trembling, the smell of the food filling my nostrils, making my mouth water. "Go on," the man urged, his voice soft and coaxing. "Take a bite. You know you want to." I stared at the box, my heart pounding, my mind screaming at me to stop. But the hunger was too powerful. It was like a living thing inside me, writhing, demanding to be fed. With a trembling hand, I opened the box. Inside was a dish I couldn't quite identify, dark, glistening, and pulsating slightly, as if it were alive. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of savory and sweet, but with that same underlying rot that I had tasted in the final meal. It was both repulsive and irresistible, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was what the whispers had been leading me to. The final bite. This time, there would be no resisting. I was too far gone, too consumed by the hunger. I lifted the fork, speared a piece of the meat, and brought it to my mouth. As soon as it touched my tongue, the world around me began to shift. The street lights flickered, the pavement rippled, and the shadows twisted and stretched. I could feel the darkness closing in, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The hunger had taken over completely. Each bite brought me deeper into the darkness, the world around me warping and distorting until it was unrecognizable. I was no longer in the street, no longer in the city. I was somewhere else, somewhere far darker, far more terrifying. The man watched with that same unsettling smile, his eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory satisfaction. "You've finally accepted it," he said, his voice echoing in the strange, shifting space around us. "This is what you were always meant to be." The last bite was the hardest. My body trembled, my mind screaming in protest, but the hunger drove me forward. I lifted the final piece to my mouth, my heart pounding, and as I swallowed, the world went black. I was falling, tumbling through an endless void, the whispers now a deafening roar in my ears. I could feel myself unraveling, my very being dissolving into the darkness. And then, just as I thought I would lose myself completely, something snapped. The darkness receded, the whispers faded, and I found myself standing in the alley once more. The food truck was gone, the street was quiet, and the night was still. But I knew deep down that something had changed. Something fundamental, something that could never be undone. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see the same pale, trembling fingers, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. They were not my hands. They were the man's hands, long, thin, and dark, the skin stretched taut over the bones. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but when I reached up to touch my face, I felt the same unfamiliar texture, the same unnatural coldness. I turned to the glass storefront beside me, desperate to see my reflection. The face that stared back at me was not my own. It was his, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with that same twisted smile, as if it had been carved into my features. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, this can't be happening." But it was. I had become him. The food truck hadn't taken my soul. It had replaced it with something darker, something that had been waiting for this moment all along. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was the new owner of the food truck. The curse had passed to me, just as it had to Jonathan, just as it had to countless others before him. I was no longer myself. I was part of the truck, part of the hunger, bound to it for all eternity. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but there was no one left to hear me. The truck would appear again, in some other dark corner of the world, and I would be there, behind the counter, serving those who were drawn to its light, just as I had been. And one day, when they were ready, the curse would pass to them, and I would be free. But until then, I was trapped, bound to the truck, to the hunger, to the darkness. The whispers returned, soft and insistent, and I knew they would never leave me now. I was part of them, part of the endless cycle that had claimed so many before me. As I walked away from the alley, the night felt different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper, and I knew that I would never be able to escape what I had become. The truck was gone, but it would return, and when it did, I would be waiting. The days blurred into nights, and the nights stretched into an endless, suffocating darkness. I had become a creature of the night, no longer bound by the constraints of time and place. I existed in a liminal space, a twilight world where the food truck appeared and disappeared at will, always at the stroke of midnight. The truck had become my prison, my curse, but also my sanctuary. Inside its metal walls, I found a strange comfort, a twisted sense of belonging. The hunger was my constant companion now, a gnawing emptiness that could never be fully satisfied, no matter how many souls I served, no matter how many meals I prepared. I quickly learned the rules of the truck, the unspoken laws that governed its existence. The food I served was not just food. It was a gateway, a passageway to something darker, something ancient and ravenous. Each meal was crafted with care, a precise mixture of ingredients and intention, designed to lure the lost and the desperate, those who were hungry for more than just sustenance. They came to me, just as I had once come to the truck, drawn by an irresistible pull, a craving they couldn't name. Some were curious, others desperate, but all of them were hungry in a way that transcended mere physical need. They were the perfect victims, ripe for the taking, and I could feel their souls quivering with anticipation as they stepped up to the counter. I watched them eat, their faces lighting up with delight as they tasted the food, unaware of the darkness that lay hidden beneath each bite. They didn't know what they were consuming, what they were becoming, but I knew. I could see it in their eyes, in the way their expressions changed as the food took hold of them, as the truck began to work its magic. They would return again and again, just as I had, until the hunger consumed them completely. And when they were ready, when the time was right, I would serve them the final meal, the one that would seal their fate, just as mine had been sealed. The truck fed on their souls, their essence, leaving behind empty husks, hollow shells that would eventually crumble into dust. And I fed on their despair, their fear, their hopelessness, drawing strength from their suffering. It was a cycle, an endless loop that I was now a part of, a loop that had no beginning and no end. But with each soul I claimed, I felt a piece of myself slipping away, lost to the darkness that had taken root inside me. The man I had once been was gone, erased by the curse of the truck, replaced by something cold, calculating, and utterly inhuman. I was no longer James. I was something else, something that existed only to serve the hunger, to feed the truck, and keep it moving through time and space, always searching for its next victim. The world outside the truck became a distant memory, a fading dream. I no longer cared about the passage of time, about the days and nights that came and went in a blur. The truck was my world now, its narrow confines my entire existence. The only thing that mattered was the hunger and the souls that fed it. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to notice something strange. The truck was changing. It was subtle at first, little things that I almost didn't notice. A slight shift in the air, a flicker in the lights, a strange hum that seemed to emanate from the walls. But as time went on, the changes became more pronounced. The truck's interior started to warp, the metal walls twisting and bending in ways that defied logic. The lights flickered more often, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air grew thick and heavy, suffused with an energy that buzzed just beneath the surface, like the hum of a distant engine. And then there were the whispers. They had always been there, lurking at the edges of my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that surrounded me. But now they were louder, more insistent, and they spoke in voices that I could no longer ignore. They told me things, dark and terrible things, secrets that I wasn't meant to know. They spoke of the truck's true nature, of the power that lay hidden within its metal frame, a power that was growing stronger with each soul I claimed. At first, I tried to block them out, to focus on my work, but it was impossible. The whispers were everywhere, filling my ears, my mind, my very soul. They spoke of the truck's origins, of the ancient forces that had created it, forces that had existed long before humanity had taken its first breath. They told me of the countless souls that had been consumed by the truck, each one adding to its power, each one feeding the darkness that drove it forward. And they told me something else, something that sent a chill down my spine, something that I had never considered. The truck wasn't just a tool, a vessel for the hunger. It was alive. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The truck wasn't just a cursed object, a supernatural entity that moved through time and space. It was a living, breathing thing, a creature of darkness that fed on the souls of the damned. And I was its servant, its puppet, bound to it by the curse that had claimed me. But the whispers didn't stop there. They told me something even more terrifying, something that made my blood run cold. The truck was changing because it was growing stronger. And it was growing stronger because it was preparing for something that was coming soon. A reckoning. I didn't know what that meant, but the whispers were clear. The truck had been feeding for centuries, growing in power, biding its time. And now it was almost ready. Ready for what? I didn't know, but I could feel it in my bones, in the very air around me. Something was coming, something dark and terrible, and the truck was at the center of it. The realization filled me with a dread I hadn't felt since the night I first encountered the truck. I had thought I was the master of this dark entity, the one who controlled its power, but I was wrong. I was nothing more than a pawn, a tool to be used and discarded when the time came. I tried to ignore the whispers, to focus on my work, but the fear gnawed at me, a constant, creeping terror that I couldn't shake. The truck was preparing for something, and I had no idea what it was. All I knew was that I was a part of it, and there was no escape. The final twist came on a night like any other. I was standing at the counter, waiting for the next lost soul to wander into my web, when the whispers suddenly fell silent. The truck's lights flickered, then dimmed, casting the interior in deep shadows. The air grew heavy, suffused with a sense of anticipation, as if the truck itself was holding its breath. And then, a figure stepped out of the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was tall, shrouded in shadow, its features indistinct. But there was something familiar about it, something that sent a jolt of recognition through me. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its presence commanding the space, filling it with an oppressive weight. As it approached the counter, the shadows around it seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive. The figure stopped in front of me, its face still hidden in darkness, and then it spoke. "You thought you could escape," it said, its voice low and cold, like the whisper of the wind through a graveyard. "But there is no escape. Not for you. Not for any of us." The words sent a chill down my spine. There was something in that voice, something that tugged at my memories, at the man I had once been. I stared at the figure, my mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of recognition that flitted through my consciousness. And then, the figure stepped into the light, and my breath caught in my throat. It was me, or rather, it was the man I had once been. The face was mine, but younger, filled with a vitality and warmth that I had long since lost. The eyes were wide and bright, the features familiar and yet foreign, as if I were looking at a stranger who shared my face. "No," I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's real," the figure said, its lips twisting into a smile that didn't reach its eyes. "You've become what you feared most. You've become the truck." The realization hit me like a blow. The truck wasn't just alive, it was me. I had become the very thing I had feared. The darkness that had consumed me, the hunger that had driven me to madness. I was the truck, and the truck was me. The figure stepped closer, its eyes boring into mine. "You've taken my place, just as I took his, and he took the one before him. The cycle never ends. The truck will continue, moving through time, claiming more souls, and you will be at the center of it forever." The words echoed in my mind, a terrible truth that I couldn't deny. The truck was a cycle, an endless loop of hunger and despair, and I was now a part of it, bound to it for all eternity. There was no escape, no redemption, only the endless hunger and the souls it would consume. The figure reached out, its hand passing through mine as if I were made of smoke. "It's time to let go," it said softly. "You are the truck now. Embrace it." I felt the darkness closing in, the shadows wrapping around me like a shroud. The truck's lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving me in utter darkness. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my ears with their terrible knowledge, their dark truths. And I understood. The truck wasn't just a curse. It was a gateway, a bridge between worlds, a conduit for the ancient darkness that existed beyond the veil of reality. It fed on souls, yes, but it also served a higher purpose, one that I was only beginning to comprehend. As the darkness closed in, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had fought the hunger, resisted the truck, but in the end, it had claimed me, just as it had claimed so many others before me. I was no longer James. I was the truck, the embodiment of hunger, the harbinger of the darkness that lay beyond. And I was ready. The truck would move on, as it always had, and I would move with it. I would serve the hunger, claim the souls, and feed the darkness that had taken root inside me. The cycle would continue, and I would be at the center of it forever. As the last of my humanity slipped away, I felt the truck hum to life around me. The shadows receded, the lights flickered back on, and the world returned to normal. The street was quiet, the night still, and the truck stood ready, its doors open, waiting for the next lost soul to step inside. I smiled, my lips twisting into a familiar, unsettling grin. The hunger was with me always, and I would feed it as I had been fed. The truck was mine now, and I was its. And somewhere, in another dark corner of the world, someone else would find themselves standing in front of the truck, drawn by a hunger they couldn't understand. And I would be waiting. If you enjoyed tonight's tale of horror, don't forget to like this video to show your support. Have a chilling story of your own or thoughts on tonight's horror? Comment below. I love hearing from you all. And for more spine-tingling stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a frightful update. Stay spooky, my friends.